news comes first. This is ABC-7 Extra.
Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. Good evening, I'm Eric Elkin. On Tuesday, the federal government said in a court filing it would not seek the death penalty in the August 3rd Walmart shooting case. But remember, the alleged shooter is also facing a state charge of capital murder, and the district attorney's office is on record that it plans to seek the death penalty. It's been nearly 3.5 years since that horrific day, and still no trial at either level. Let's first take a look back at how we got to where we are now. August 3rd, 2019, 23 people killed, dozens more wounded and impacted forever. The alleged gunman, Patrick Crusius, arrested behind the Walmart. The next morning, El Paso District Attorney Jaime Esparza makes his intentions clear.
I can tell you from the outset, the state charge is capital murder, and so he is eligible for the death penalty. We will seek the death penalty.
The man to his right, U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Texas, John Bash. 3 days later, on August 7th, President Trump visits El Paso, heard saying to Bash, President Trump actually directly telling John Bash, get the job done. 2 months later, on October 10th, Crusius arraigned. He pleads not guilty. It's the first and only time the public has seen Crusius in the now more than 3 years since. His defense team making its fight about this.
Mr. Stevens and I are morally opposed to the death penalty.
Then on February 6, 2020, the federal government charges Crusius with 90 counts of federal hate crimes.
And that he committed these violent crimes to frighten and intimidate the Hispanic community. Hate crimes physically wound and psychologically harm victims.
We're ready for this fight. DOJ was quite literally born for this fight. It's in our DNA.
But then the COVID-19 pandemic gripped the world, halting our way of life as we knew it, including the justice system. In October 2020, U.S. Attorney John Bash announces his resignation 1 month ahead of the presidential election. In that election, Ivan Rosales is elected the new El Paso District Attorney, replacing a retiring Jaime Esparza in January 2021. A year and a half later, the district court judge issues a gag order after Rosales suggests the state case could start before the federal case. Her tumultuous tenure doesn't even last 2 years. All while that unfolds, Jaime Esparza reemerges, nominated in October 2022 to be the next U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Texas and prosecute the federal case. He's sworn in December 12th as the U.S. Attorney, 2 days ahead of the District Attorney. Rosales is set to resign. Texas Governor Greg Abbott then appoints Bill Hicks as the next El Paso DA. On December 21st, he's sworn in to finish Rosales' term, clean up the office, and lead the state's case against the alleged Walmart shooter. And 5 days ago, federal prosecutors make it official. They will not seek the death penalty. Joining us now on ABC-7 Extra is the El Paso District Attorney Bill Hicks. Mr. Hicks, thank you so much for taking some time tonight on ABC-7 Extra. I want to start with what we just saw and what just happened over the last couple of days. The federal case, ultimately federal prosecutors deciding that they will not seek the death penalty in the Walmart case. As it pertains to the state case, I know there's a gag order in effect, so we will not violate the gag order. But I want to get your reaction first to the federal government's decision to not pursue the death penalty in this case. Were you surprised?
Well, I'll tell you that first off, it's very important for everyone to understand that there are two cases, two separate and independent cases that were proceeding along at the same time. The federal government's case was going to go first because they have the Walmart shooter in custody. The state's case is proceeding second. So whatever the federal government does, they do on their own. Whatever we do on our own. So while we are using the same evidence, the same investigators, the same evidence, the same people that did the investigation, they proceed separately and independently. So when we heard what the federal government did, we did not have any insight that it was going to happen beforehand. Nobody tipped their hand to us. We heard at the same time as everybody else. Of course, our reaction is, well, it is what it is. We don't have any control over what the federal government does. We are, the death penalty, the notice of intent to seek the death penalty has been on file. It remains on file, and we intend to continue on track regardless of what the federal government has done. Now, there are aspects of the fact that the federal government has the Walmart shooter in their custody, and that does affect what's going to be our ability to go to trial and our ability to proceed. We're looking into how their plea or their removal of the death penalty and seeking only to have life in prison, that procedure and how that's going to affect our ability to go forward, we're looking into that. There are some legalities that we're researching, making sure that we can go forward, how that's going to affect our ability to go forward. But I want it to be clear that our intention is to continue forward seeking the death penalty as previously pled.
Public perception is, once they hear, just like you did, that the federal government will not seek the death penalty, there were a lot of people upset with that decision in this community in particular. And I think public perception from that point is, well, now the state case is really important and that much more important. Not that your work isn't important otherwise, and I'm sure you're not approaching it as though we don't have to do anything if the federal government takes care of it, but now all of a sudden, do you have a moment where you recognize what is on your plate now and where you want to go with this that the federal government has chose not to?
Well, as you know, from the very beginning of my taking this office, the number one priority has always been to get this case back on track. I think that there have been some issues in the past that the case hasn't been properly handled, properly addressed, or properly prioritized. So from the very beginning, this case has been number one in our priority list of getting it back on track. Regardless of what is going to happen or wouldn't happen in the federal side, having this case ready to go to trial whenever the Honorable Judge Sam Medrano calls us to trial has been number one priority. The people of El Paso deserve justice. The victims of this case deserve justice. And being prepared to take this case to trial has been my number one priority. So I don't know whether or not the federal case was ever really in my thought process as far as what they do is going to circumvent or take away what we were going to be able to do, right. As much as I wanted to make sure that we were prepared to go forward. If at any point we were not able to go forward because of logistics or the law or what have you, that's the way it may work out. But my goal is we were always to be prepared.
When the federal government announced those federal hate crime charges back in February 2020, then U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Texas, John Bash, had made a point of working in parallel with the state, which of course at the time was District Attorney Jaime Esparza. Now Jaime Esparza is in that role as U.S. Attorney, and they are not seeking the death penalty. So you're seeking two different things ultimately. In part, you're seeking justice, which is similar, but in part different in terms of death penalty, no death penalty. How much do you foresee yourself working with the federal prosecutors as you work on your case?
Well, ultimately, the trial is still the trial. Both sides have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these murders occurred. These 23 people were killed, the other 27 people were injured. We still have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, both sides. It's the punishment side of it that's a little different. But the punishment's always been a little different. On the federal side, you have a sentencing guidelines. It just functions differently on the federal side. Mm-hmm. In the state side, we're going to have to ask the jury to answer two very important questions. And depending on their answer to those important questions, then the judge will or will not impose the death penalty. So the punishment side has always been something that's going to function a little differently. Now it functions much more differently, but throughout, from the very beginning, we were always going to be doing the same thing, or essentially the same thing in our guilt, not guilt stages. I anticipate that we will still continue to work with the federal government and the federal prosecutors from, I don't know if it was the first week or early on in the second week after I had accepted the appointment. I started talking with the federal prosecutors and letting them know that once we got on our side, once we got our case organized and reset and were ready, that I wanted to meet with the federal prosecutors and go through our evidence, go through their evidence, make sure that we had everything lined up. And they were very receptive to that, and I think they still are.
When you joined us about a month ago here on ABC-7, I asked your position on the death penalty, and you had really emphasized how serious of a sentence that ultimately is, and that it only rises to that level in very few exceptions. Some people, as we heard Attorney Joe Spencer, defense attorney, are opposed, morally opposed to the death penalty. For those in the community who may be morally opposed to the death penalty, while you seek that, what do you tell them?
Well, first off, I want to separate this answer from the Walmart case, because it's very important we understand that when I speak in general about the death penalty, that I'm not speaking about the Walmart case.
Because of the gag order.
Specifically, right.
Okay.
But in my opinion, the death penalty is the most severe sanction that the state of Texas can ever seek. If we're looking to take the life of another person as a state-sanctioned event, it has to be the most severe sanction, so it is reserved for the most severe crimes. It is a sanction that requires the most severe scrutiny. It requires the most severe circumstances, and it is not something that any one person should be making without a great deal of comment and influence from the leadership team that they've surrounded themselves with, from the investigation on the case, from the victim advocates, from the investigators on the case, from the prosecutors who are looking into the case. All of these factors need to be taken into consideration. The individual's history, their mental and physical health, all of these factors need to be taken into consideration before me as a prosecutor am going to make that decision to seek that most severe sanction. In the most severe cases, it is the proper thing to do to protect society.
And you've done that once in your career before.
I have.
As it pertains to the transfer of custody, once the federal case is wrapped up, I know the other day at your news conference you said, I can't get into what ifs, there's too many crystal ball questions, but I'm going to kind of ask you a crystal ball question. I may not get much out of it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have any anticipation of, once the federal case, the trial is wrapped up, whether it's, starts next January and takes however long, do you have any sense of how long that transfer of custody to the state could take?
Well, you have to remember that in federal cases, things operate a little differently. Once you have a guilt, not guilt decision, whether that comes through a trial or whether it comes through a plea, either way, once you get that guilt, not guilt decision, then there is a several-month lag until the person is sentenced. The judge in the case, in any case, sets the date for sentencing. The probation department prepares a sentencing memorandum. Both sides have the opportunity to submit sentencing memorandums to the judge on why the person should receive a particular sentence, why they shouldn't receive a particular sentence. Depending on the case, sometimes both sides submit memorandums, sometimes only one, sometimes none. But you have that period of time, and then the person is sentenced. So even after the trial date, we're looking, if Mr. Cruces, if the Walmart shooter goes to trial in January when it's set, we're still looking at several months afterwards before he's sentenced. After that, I don't know when we're going to be able to get him back into state custody, or if we're going to be able to get him back into state custody. That's where that crystal ball comes into play. That's where I told you we were looking at several legal possibilities. I don't know. We're still researching that, and hopefully we'll have an answer sometime in the very near future.